This video is sponsored by the Association of Anaesthetists, A-Line, Health Education Northeast and NEMO.
Our first speaker is Dr. Shan Ramachandran. He's a trainee in paediatrics in the Merseyside Deanery. He's had a rather stormy year being a patient on intensive care with COVID-19. His story has been published in the anaesthesia reports for those of you who'd like to read a bit more. Today, he will be speaking to us about his experiences and the support he received to allow him to get back to work.
Thanks for that, guys. And yeah, welcome. And I was just going to basically talk to you guys today about my experiences of COVID-19 from treating to becoming a patient. I'm a 27-year-old doctor, currently a paediatric trainee at Arrow Park in the Wirral. However, during the pandemic, I was a Foundation Year 2 doctor at Leighton Hospital in Crewe, sort of a busy district general hospital in the northwest. So today I'm basically going to talk to you about my experiences, how I was hospitalised with COVID-19, and then I just thought I'd reflect a bit upon sort of being an ITU patient, the impact it had on myself, my family, and then sort of my subsequent recovery and getting back to work. So hopefully you guys find something useful out of it. So pandemic, World Health Organization declared this a pandemic on the 11th of March 2020. And yeah, at the time I was working on the COVID wards at Leighton Hospital. This included sort of clerking in the patients or managing the acutely ill COVID patients. I was sort of hospitalized on the 12th of April, as I'll come on to, when I think the cases and everything had sort of exploded, which is probably the peak, or the first peak anyway. I did a stretch of nights, primarily on the COVID wards, and then the day after I finished those nights, I developed my initial symptoms. So I had a raised temperature and abdominal pain. Didn't have any cough or respiratory issues, and to be honest with you, I was absolutely fine. I'm fit and well. I've never had any medical problems previously. I never smoked or anything, so I thought, you know what, I'll be absolutely fine. This is, it's not going to cause me any issues. Unfortunately, as the week progressed, I started to deteriorate. The day after the symptoms started, I developed myalgia, and then about 3 days later, I started with that nasty cough and wheeze, these sort of typical COVID issues. I managed to get a swab from Leighton, which came back negative, interestingly enough, but I was getting worse. My energy was dropping really quickly as well. I found making food and drink and stuff really tiring. And then when I actually had it, I was getting so breathless that I found that I couldn't take anything in. So I was then getting dehydrated. It was a vicious circle, and I was just getting weaker and weaker and weaker. And I felt really rotten, but I still thought I'd be absolutely fine. I just thought, you know what, I'll ride it out. It's not going to be a massive issue. Turns out I got that slightly wrong. About 7 days after the symptoms started, I was really unwell. The only way I can describe it is I felt I could only use a top quarter of my lungs, and that the other 3/4 were filled with concrete. It felt awful. I was coughing non-stop. I was sleeping on 6 pillows, and I could barely walk to my own toilet, about 10 yards away. I think eventually I couldn't even complete a full sentence because of breathlessness, and I finally called a paramedic. The paramedic was ace. He was really good. He came, my sats were 85% in air, so he popped me in oxygen. And the rest of my observations were pretty grim. So he instantly took me to A&E at Wythenshawe Hospital in South Manchester. I was seen in A&E at Wythenshawe really quickly. They did my bloods and stuff, which you can see there. They're all pretty grim to look at. I was requiring around 8 litres of oxygen just to maintain my saturations, and they started me on antibiotics and fluids. They also did this chest x-ray, which probably shows how unwell I was. You've got your typical COVID appearance, the bilateral infiltration, and it's also really poor inspiratory effort, which sort of shows how difficult I was finding it to breathe. I was admitted to the medical ward, and that night was genuinely awful, and probably the first time it dawned on me how unwell I was. I was requiring around 15 litres of oxygen, and I was still really hypoxic. I couldn't breathe, and I'll be honest with you, it's really terrifying not being able to breathe. It's something I think we all, and me included, we all take for granted, just being able to breathe freely. And not being able to do that, and the extent to which I couldn't, was genuinely terrifying. And to be honest with you, midway through that night, I genuinely thought I was going to die. That's what it feels like. It feels like you're being drowned from the inside. I was also being like continually seen by the doctors, and sort of as a doctor myself, I know if doctors are seeing you overnight continuously, it's a pretty bad sign. By the end of that night, the anaesthetist had come to see me and told me, look, you need to be intubated. And in a weird way, it felt like relief. That night would be basically torture, and the thought of being able to sleep through that was actually a weird sense of relief. Unfortunately, I then FaceTimed my mum and dad to tell them, and it was awful. And it's probably the worst thing I've ever done in my life. It was genuinely horrific. They were in pieces. I don't know what I said. I also looked shocking as well. So, you know, it made everything worse, frankly. And yeah, it was really horrible. And it's sort of the last thing I properly remember. After that, I was taken and I was intubated, and I don't really recall any of that. I don't know if my brain is just sort of shut down, or you know, to protect me or whatever. I remained intubated on ITU for 7 days. I think this is the X-ray they took after they'd intubated me, and you can see it's pretty unpleasant, especially that right lung. I was intubated for 7 days, which, on you know, in the grand scheme of things with COVID, is not too bad. A lot of people were intubated for longer. So when I was in ITU, this is sort of what they've told me after I got better, but initially I did improve a bit. However, I took a step back the following day and required around 15 hours of pronation and muscle relaxants. Over the next sort of 3 days, they weaned my oxygen requirement and prepped me for intubation on the 6th day, and then successfully extubated me on the 7th. Weirdly, I sort of have odd memories of my extubation. I sort of seem to I've got it in my head that Luther from TV managed to extubate me, which within sure didn't happen. But it's sort of a sample of the false memories I was getting from that point on. I remained on IT for another 2 days whilst they watched my oxygen, and they sort of rehabbed me. Whilst on the ventilator, I'd lost around 20 kilos in weight, mainly muscle, and it meant that I couldn't walk. So I had pretty intensive physio input, which was really difficult, actually. I couldn't even shuffle to the end of the bed on my own, let alone walk. I think by the end of those 2 days, I could basically get to the end of the bed, stand up, and maybe shuffle forward with assistance. But it was basically, I felt like I'd become a baby again, need to learn how to walk. I had speech and language therapy input as well, because I couldn't talk or swallow, or, you know, so eat anything safely. And then, as I said, I was having a lot of false memories. Very vivid images of patients who were next to me in the bays and what was happening to them. But it turns out all these memories were false. My first sort of actual lucid memory was messaging my family and friends just to be like, look, I'm, you know, in the land of the living, etc. But yeah, I was stepped down after that onto the medical ward for another 3 or 4 days, where they just weaned my oxygen and continued to build me up a bit. I continued with the physio, and by the time I was discharged, I could walk with crutches, and speech and language therapy continued with that. I couldn't talk, but I could eat disgusting thickened foods and stuff like that, at least to, you know, try and build myself up a bit. But yeah, 4 days later, I was discharged to my mum and dad's house to continue my rehab, because I couldn't really look after myself at that point. I then sort of did my rehab at my mum and dad's for another sort of 2.5 months. Initially, the first 2 or 3 weeks, COVID obviously battered me. And I was basically knackered. I was so tired. I found really basic things like washing and dressing and brushing my teeth really tiring. And if I'd wash and brush, I'd then need to have a nap afterwards. And for 3 weeks that continued, and it was pretty, you know, it was really frustrating. I was basically eating like 5 meals a day with lots of protein to try and build myself up and put the weight back on again. After that 3 weeks, I just sort of tried to build up my mobility and teach myself to walk again. I built it really slowly, just walking around my room, then upstairs, and then eventually going outside. And by the end of the 4 weeks, I could sort of walk about 3 miles and do a bit of jogging, which for me is not, you know, ideal, because I was running 4 times a week prior to this. But you know, it was something, and I felt like it was getting better. At that point, it was just a case of sort of getting myself back to sort of a functional baseline where I could do stuff for myself, so like driving, cooking, cleaning. And it took another month, and sort of by mid-June, I felt ready to get back to Manchester to live on my own, and start with work again. Work were really good with me. They didn't push me at all. If anything, I came back earlier than they wanted me to. And it's because I was bored senseless, doing nothing, felt really useless at the time. But they were so good with me. They were really flexible. They made me supernumerary, which was excellent because it allowed me that flexibility. If I was feeling grim on a certain day, I didn't necessarily need to do it. And I just built my hours up gradually. And yeah, their attitude to my return made things so much easier, actually. So in a nutshell, that's what happened to me. And I just thought at this point I might reflect a bit about what happened. And I thought I'd start with reflecting on ITU because it's quite a novel experience. And, you know, hopefully no one else really experiences it amongst everyone here. But I mean, the first thing is obviously it's utterly terrifying. It really is. It really hit me how unwell I was when I sort of woke up, and sort of that plus the hypoxia plus all the meds they give you for the intubation means that you get this really horrible sort of sensory overload where everything seems dialed up to 11. You know, just even the little noises, the beeps and everything, they sort of stick with you, and it makes for a really scary scenario. Add into that all the face masks and the PPE, and it's actually genuinely terrifying. My sort of prior experiences didn't help as well. Having worked on the COVID wards and seen COVID patients dying, it was. I found myself projecting that upon my own self. I think, you know, you leave the human mind on its own for 24 hours and can come up with all sorts. And it took a real mental toll on me, which I only really appreciated later on. I also sort of noticed this really acute sense of loss of identity as well. I was a patient, which was a very new experience for me. And as a doctor, I think we're all sort of slightly control freaks. And, you know, you get all the bloods and the obs and the trends, and you make all these decisions. And you don't get that as a patient. And when you're not used to it, it's actually very difficult. And again, it just added to that scariness and alien situation. It was mitigated to an extent by Wythenshawe, who were brilliant. They communicated so clearly with me. And treated me like a doctor and sort of spoke to me, gave me lots of information, made me feel as involved as possible, which must have been really difficult. But it did really help me and help tether me a bit. As I said, I've also got lots of these false, weird memories of patients around me and what was happening to them. Really vivid, clear memories. And I only found out later when working with the IT psychologist that these are just false memories and my brain is just filled in the blanks, which was again difficult because it made me feel like I couldn't trust my own brain for a period of time, which I'll come on to in a second. If it was bad for me, it was worse for my family, frankly. I slept through the worst of it, to be honest, but for them, it was basically that 7 days of torture when I was intubated. We're a really close family, and it was really difficult for them. They were basically just waiting by the phone, not able to eat, not able to sleep. My dad couldn't go to work. They're just waiting for a call from Wythenshawe. And, you know, my brothers have told me the house was basically like a morgue afterwards. And it's probably very irrational, but also very human. But when I actually woke up and was properly with it, I felt very guilty about what they'd been put through. They're doing a lot better now. They've sort of seen me get better, but at the same time, I'm not sure if they'll ever fully recover from it. I'm sure it's left scars. And yeah, they now sort of worry when I go to work. They worry if I cough. They worry if I just look under the weather. And it is really difficult for them. Again, Wythenshawe were, you know, first rate with them. They really were outstanding. They would speak to them 5-6 times a day. They were always free to take their calls, and they were so busy at this point as well. So to find the time to have these like continued discussions with them was so helpful. And it's something we just got to be aware of, especially when, you know, family members can't really visit with COVID at the moment. And it did help them, and it also helped me knowing that someone was actually looking after my family when I was sort of asleep. So yeah, that communication with the family is just so important. You know, just those 3 minutes you take to speak to someone, it can actually like completely change their day. So yeah, it's so important. Thought the other thing I'd sort of just briefly touch on was to reflect upon my rehab itself. I found it really difficult, probably partly because of my own personality. But prior to COVID, I was really fit and well. I sort of used to run 4 times a week, and I loved doing it. I had loads of energy, to the point it probably made me really annoying. But I could do all these 12-hour shifts, not a problem. And you know, I wouldn't be affected by any of it. But after COVID, I felt like a different person. Those first sort of 2 or 3 weeks after I was discharged was really awful, being so limited and dependent on others, which is not what I'm used to. And then even after that, I still feel tired now with the sort of post-viral fatigue. And it can be really frustrating because it's not what I'm used to. It's not what I'm like normally. Nowadays, I'll do a 10-hour shift from work and come home and I'll be absolutely wiped out and I can't really do anything else, which really frustrates me and really annoys me, despite knowing the reason for it. So I've found that entire sort of rehab, learning to walk, learning to talk, the fatigue, really frustrating. The other massive issue I was having was psychologically. Initially, after I was discharged, I was completely fine. I wasn't having any problems. But in August, I started to have really bad nightmares, which would wake me up at night, sort of flashbacks to the ITU experience, or what I thought was my ITU experience. I was getting around 2 to 3 hours sleep a night. And then I started having flashbacks during the day, and a couple of them caused me to black out, which again was really scary and made me quite frustrated. Added to that, I was getting short-term memory loss. I was forgetting really basic things like to lock the car, to lock the doors and stuff like that. And it was really getting on top of me and getting me quite down. Luckily, I was offered the support of an IT psychologist that said to contact them anytime if I've got any problems. So I've been seeing them since August, pretty much weekly, and working with them. And it has really helped because now I'm not getting the flashbacks anymore. I've got coping mechanisms for when I get the bad sort of dreams. I'm sleeping 6 to 8 hours a night, so I'm doing so well in comparison. I think had I not sought that help, I'd be in a really bad way, and I'd be really struggling. And I certainly wouldn't be able to talk to you guys about what happened now. So it's made all the world of difference. It's just so vital to seek that support if you need it, which I clearly did because I was clearly sort of exhibiting sort of PTSD-like symptoms. And now basically I'm doing really, really well. I've been back at work full time since mid-July and I'm really enjoying my work. I still find it tiring, but it's getting better. Not having any problems with my breathing. I could get the occasional bit of like asthma-like symptoms, but it's perfectly manageable. And I can now sort of run 2 times a week, which at least is something, and it's getting better. Psychologically, as I said, touch wood, I'm doing really well. As I said, I can sleep perfectly fine now, and I feel a lot more, on firmer footing, as it were. I'm still getting help from the IT psychology team, but yeah, I do feel a lot better, and it's going to take, a bit more time, about 8 to 10 more months, I've been told, before everything fully resolves. So I thought I'd just sort of slowly start to wrap things up at that point. But yeah, basically, I mean, we're all products of our own experiences, and COVID has been a massive one for me, and it's changed me for the better or the worse. I'm not sure. If I guess you can draw anything from it, is firstly would be to look after yourself. Prior to falling ill with COVID, I was probably a little bit run down. I'd done a lot of shifts and stuff, and it probably didn't help me when I did fall ill. So just look after yourself, be aware of your body, be aware that sometimes you do need to take a break. We're not superheroes. And then actually, as important is to look after each other. The theme of the day, sort of leveling the field, but promoting quality, etc., is so important. I've actually been really lucky. I've been worked with the most lovely people, and I've been welcomed wherever I've worked. I've never faced any sort of issues with bullying, racial discrimination, anything like that. But I also know that others aren't that lucky. And we really need to just be aware of these guys and look after them and make sure that they're not struggling, because although I might not be able to sort of, put myself in their shoes with the experiences they're going through, I can appreciate that it probably will make them more susceptible to falling ill. If something like what happened to me happens to them, it's genuinely horrific for, the person themselves, for their family, for everything. So we just need to look after each other and, make sure we're watching out for our friends and colleagues. Communication with family, as I said earlier, it's so important. It makes just the world of difference. My family, just the fact that Wythenshawe looked after my family so well, it actually really helped me and them. So just take this sort of 2 or 3 minutes. I know everyone's so busy, but just take those few seconds to speak to the family give them an update, reassure them, answer their questions, because that 2-3 minutes you spend with them can change their day. And then finally, it's just a psychological support, really. As I said, I don't know where I should have think where I'd have been had I not had access to that help in August. Certainly wouldn't be working to the extent I'm now, certainly wouldn't be talking to yourselves or functioning anywhere near as well as I am. And it's just so important. It's really easy to be too proud and to say that you don't need it. And it's something I suspect I would have been guilty of previously. But its importance is vital. And it's not just for experiences like what I've had, but also, you know, if you're going through stuff like bullying or racial discrimination or anything, it leaves a psychological scar. And it's, yeah, just seek that help, because you'll be amazed at sort of the weight it lifts off you when you start talking to people. So that's pretty much me. I think I'm just basically sort of say thank you for listening. I hope I haven't bored you too much. And then just really finally, if there's anyone from Wythenshawe knocking about out there, it's just a massive thank you from the bottom of my heart, for myself, for my family, because you saved my life, and it's a debt I don't think we'll ever be able to repay. So we're really, really grateful. So thanks very much, guys.